60 addresses in 34 years. 22 schools and 2 universities across 5 states and territories and 2 tropical islands. 47 left behind wall clocks. 291 shitty showers from not yet knowing the correct configuration of the taps. 1,803 ham-fisted attempts to answer the question, oh, your parents in the army. No, they're not. They're not. It's just that some stuff happened. That's what this show is for, to expand on stuff happened. The first thing you need to know is that I'm okay, relatively. The second thing you need to know is that 60 is not a made-up number. 60 is not even a rounded-up number. 60 is in fact a rounded-down number because there are actually 67 places I've lived between being born and now. It's just that I'm only counting the ones that I can remember myself. What this means is I moved 7 times before I stopped shitting in my pants. Or regularly shitting in my pants. But I'm okay. We start in 1985. I'm 5 years old and I live in Elliott Street in Gin, Queensland. It is me, my mum Jenny, our cat Spitz, and every shade of beige that exists in the world. In the olden days, they had sepia photographs. In the 80s, we lived in sepia lounge rooms. It's just us because mum and dad divorced when I'm very young. The first move happens in 1986 because mum had met and dated and married Adrian, the man who would become the father to my little sister Lauren. We moved to the outskirts of Gin, a place called Tyrone Road, and it is here we learn what a horrible snob I am. It's true. See, the owners of the house that we rented had horses. That is, they had the house and the backyard and a paddock attached to the backyard in which they kept horses. Now, I had no concept of ownership or renting or animal husbandry, so all I knew was that we lived in a house that had horses. Ergo, we had horses. It never occurred to me to ask why I was never allowed to ride our horses, or feed our horses, or touch our horses, or be in the same paddock as our horses, and it never occurred to me to ask because I just assumed that's what fancy rich people did. You had nice things you didn't touch. Like the plates you only get out when you've got company. That's what we had. We had the good china, we had the good towels, we had the good horses. So we learned that I'm a horrible snob and a bit stupid. We also learned that I am extraordinarily obedient because I did not once touch the good horses. We left Tyrone Road to go to Mount Isa because Adrian had gotten a job in the mines there. We started in a rental in Ruby Street, a place with a pool, and this is better than having horses because I was allowed in the pool. I was not allowed in the horses. We left Ruby Street because Mum and Adrian bought a house, and this is the one and only time in 60 houses that I lived in a home that my immediate family actually owned. It was me and Mum and Adrian and Lauren in a house with a fence and a dog and some budgerigars. The family was practically nuclear. Mum and Adrian's marriage certainly went nuclear. They divorced after 5 minutes and was back to living in flats. First in a flat in Marion Street, but we couldn't stay there because the next door neighbours were junkies who kept breaking into our house to steal peanut butter sandwiches. I'm not making this up. We would come home to find the bread and a breadboard and a knife and an open jar of Kraft Chunky just sitting on the bench. We were either being burgled or haunted. So we left there and moved to Miles Street, and it is here in 1988 that I ran away from home for the first time. I made it to the letterbox. Yes. It is also here in 1988 that Mum met Dale. Now, Dale was stupid but evil, and I really mean that. I mean this in the worst way. He emotionally, psychologically, and physically abused my mother. And he was over 6 feet tall, a kickboxer, and often worked as a bouncer. So when I say physically abused, I'm not pulling any punches, because fuck knows he didn't. He terrorised our family for nearly 10 years. Every bad thing that happened to me between 1989 and 1996 can be directly attributed to him. Now, it might sound like I'm making him out to be some kind of two-dimensional storybook villain, but the thing is, I've now known the man for 26 years. If there's a third dimension to him, I've yet to see it. So under Dale's influence, we left Mount Isa and moved to Cairns. Why? I don't know. Shortly after that, we left Cairns and we moved to a town on the outskirts of Cairns called Edmonton. Why? I don't know. Shortly after that, we left Edmonton and moved back to Mount Isa. Why?
You don't.
See, you here in 2015 in Melbourne know as much as I did, and I lived with the man. So we were back in Mount Isa for like a minute before we left again for Weipa. Why? Correct! For everyone in the back, she mouthed, I don't know. Didn't say it. We left for Weipa by car. Yeah, Mum and Dale and Lauren and I piled into a Nissan Navara, which for the record is a 2-door vehicle. There is a space behind the front seats about this wide, and this is where my sister and I perched on a pile of blankets and pillows. This is what is called a king cab. And I believe it's called that because there's no king way, it's made for 4 people. So we got to Weipa. And we stayed with some people. Now you'll hear this a lot for the next 5 or 10 minutes. Some people, I have no idea who the fuck any of these people are. Pretty much from the Gulf of Carpentaria up, total strangers. But we lived with some of them, and we travelled with some of them, and I was molested by one of them, but that's coming up later. So we got to Weipa. And we stayed with some people in a house with a bathroom that was permanently, inexplicably, submerged in an inch of water. Yeah. It's the only house I've ever been to where you had to go outside to get away from the mosquitoes. It didn't matter, we left after a couple of days, but not before I got enrolled in Weipa State Primary School for 2 days, giving me just enough time to spend one day terrified of everyone and everything, and then the next day still terrified of everyone and everything because I was 8 years old, living in the middle of nowhere with a bunch of strangers in a house with a slip and slide bathroom. So we left Weipa, piled back into the Navara and its king cab and drove to Bamaga. Bamaga is the town that is closest to the northernmost point of the Australian mainland. On our second day, Dale took Mum to Thursday Island for the day, leaving Lauren and I behind in Bamaga. Just want to recap real quick. We left Mount Isa, drove to Weipa, stayed there 4 days, splashed about in the bathroom, enrolled in school, left school, drove north to Bamaga where people rarely spoke English, and Dale thought that that was as good a time as any to take Mum away for the day and not tell us where he'd gone. So I'm left in the care of some woman. I have no idea who she is. Sister, cousin, friend, the mayor? No idea. She doesn't molest me, just so we're clear, but I do think that maybe she's deaf because she answers every question I ask with, what? Which got very distressing. Is Mum with Dale? What? Is Mum coming back today? What? Is Dale bringing Mum back today? What? Is my mum coming back? What? Is my mum coming back? What? Eventually, I'm hysterical. This one solitary white child losing his shit in the middle of the dusty red street, just screaming, "Where is my mum?" And she thinks I'm insane before finally having a realization. She grabs my shoulders and she says, "Hey, small boy, what means yes?" And that is how I started to learn pidgin. Yeah. I eventually became fluent. I've forgotten most of it now, but if I ever call you a watikazi, it's not great. So it turns out we're not done with our journey north. We leave Bamaga and go to York Island, which is so far north, it is actually closer to Papua New Guinea than it is to the Australian mainland. It is also so small, on this giant map, it didn't register one single dot, so I had to guess. It's there. York Island, known by its traditional name of Masig, is 800 metres across, had no indoor plumbing, one single shop that was stocked only fortnightly and pretty much empty the rest of the time, and even when it was stocked, it was mostly just washing powder and lime cordial. The island also had one single nurse's station, which was also only stocked fortnightly and stocked so primitively that my grandmother, in one of the only nice things she ever did for any one of us, stole supplies from the hospital she worked at in Mount Isa and mailed them to us so that we wouldn't get tetanus and die. Some fun facts. 1, I was at risk of tetanus because I smashed my face open on a dinghy trying to get a better look at a dolphin in rough seas. Thank you. That's the first one that's ever warranted an applause. I was very small and I couldn't see over the bow, so I leaned all the way over. The boat went down, I went down, the boat hit a wave, I kept going down, the boat came back up, 6 stitches. Fun fact number 2, that wouldn't be the only time I ever got hit in the face with a boat. Fun fact number 3, I didn't get tetanus, but I did get scurvy. Yeah, I was such a fussy eater that I wouldn't eat anything with a visible face, or too many bones, or not enough bones. And that pretty much rules out all seafood, which you'll be surprised to learn is all there is to eat in the middle of the Torres Strait. So I ate nothing but rice and tomato sauce for every meal, and eventually I got scurvy. I also sat on a shark. A group of us, some people, none of whom molest me, travelled via 2 dinghies to a smaller island. But before we can get ashore, stay with me. Before we can get ashore, it becomes apparent that we are being tailed, stalked, hunted by a large tiger shark. It is no longer safe to get out of the boats, and we can't return to Masig for fear of just bringing the sharks with us. So first they try to spear the shark, but that just makes it mad. Then they decide they're going to drag the shark up on shore. Now I have no idea how they achieve this, because I'm so convinced at this point that I'm going to die that I actually cannot remember what happens next. If I think about it too much, my brain goes, "Nope!" and snaps shut. I do have one memory of the shark swimming under our dinghy, and I was so afraid. I was terrified. I was vibrating with fear. If the gravitational force of the Earth were even 1 degree less, all my molecules would have just shaken apart and I would have been a pile of goo. But they got the shark up on shore. Again, I have no idea how. It's 404, page not found up here. They got the shark up on shore, and it was safe for us to get out of the boats. But was it safe for me? Really? Because at that moment, Dale thought it would be a good idea, just a real fucking Kodak moment, to have me, an 8-year-old child, sitting astride a very recently dead tiger shark. So remember now how I said I was extraordinarily obedient? I never touched the good horses. Yeah. Well, Dale was an adult who had given an instruction. So I sat on the shark, and a photo was taken. Yeah. Turns out the shark wasn't dead yet. Can you see the people leaping out of the way? Can you see me? No, you can't! Because I leapt off and I fucking ran. Ran as fast as my tiny, terrified, malnourished, scurvy-afflicted legs could carry me. Which, as it turns out, was all the way down to the crocodile traps that were 20 metres down the beach. Once those were spotted, we very quickly got back into the boats and went home, putting an end to our day of teabagging death. Just leave that there. We didn't stay on Masig for much longer, but we did stay long enough for me to have just the best birthday and Christmas ever. No presents, the shark, scurvy, Dale, a thunderbox. A thunderbox is what you have when you don't have indoor plumbing. A thunderbox is an outhouse. And inside the outhouse, I'm going to tell you this, inside the outhouse is a seat, and underneath the seat is a bucket. Merry Christmas. There are a lot of carols about kissing under the mistletoe, surprisingly few about shitting over a bucket of maggots. So towards the end of 1989, we make our first attempt to run away from Dale. It won't be the last. But we fly from Masig to Thursday Island. Once we get to Thursday Island, we can go no further because Mum had to be put in hospital with a severe case of dengue fever and a mild case of pregnancy. The next day, my sister had to go into hospital with impetigo. I don't know what that is. This gave I still don't. She won't tell me. This gave Dale a chance to catch up to us and pretty much put himself back into our lives. So I ended up staying with some people I don't know. One of them does molest me, the 19-year-old son of the family who still lived at home. Because with Mum and my sister in hospital, and Dale off drinking rum like there was a time limit, I was pretty much left alone with these strangers. And one afternoon I found myself in the bedroom of this guy, and he touched me in all my places while he watched Porky's 2. And that, I feel, is the most degrading part of this whole experience. I was molested to Porky's 2. What part of my supple 9-year-old frame screams shitty 80s teen sex comedies even shittier sequel? It is insulting. I'm not saying it would have been better if I'd been molested to Citizen Kane, but just something a little bit classier. It's okay. It is okay. You don't get to inflict lasting emotional trauma on me without copping a little bit yourself. You see, the reward for letting him touch me for however long was him showing me his penis, because dudes think you seeing their dick as like a prize, am I right? Yeah. Stop sending dick pics. So he's all smug and casual, and he gets it out. But he can't just pull his pants down, he's got to pull his pants out and down while he simultaneously bucks his hips because it's so big he needs the room, like he's trying to steer a Mack truck into a Westfield car park, just So he gets it out. Thing is, I've never seen a grown man's erect penis before. It's thick and stiff and weirdly shiny and tight and kind of purple. And I think he is sick or disfigured or allergic to something, or he's just been stung by many hornets, because it looks like the world's worst balloon animal. And all of this registers on my face. So now, quick exercise. Imagine you are 19 years old and you are proudly showing off your magnificent cock to a child, and kids are pretty easily impressed, right? But no, imagine now you get this reaction. Now, I'm no self-esteem expert, but I'm pretty sure he's thought about this face more than I thought about that dick. So, while all this was happening, the hospital visits, the shark, the only screening in the world of Porky's 2 where the audience felt anything. Oh, that's the one that's too far. While all this was happening, my great-grandmother back in Mount Isa had had a stroke and needed constant care. So, while we were unsuccessful in running away from Dale, we were able to justify returning to the mainland and heading back to Mount Isa. Then, in 1991, my great-grandmother wisely decides that she doesn't want to spend the rest of her days in a remote dust bowl. So my great-grandparents and my grandparents moved to Tin Can Bay, on the northern end of Queensland's Sunshine Coast. Mum, Lauren, my new brother Tommy and I follow so that we can be close to our family, and also because it gives us one more chance to run away from Dale. Dale's sister worked for the Child Support Agency within the Department of Human Services. So every time we ran away, she would simply look us up and then tell Dale where we were. I say this as a serious sidebar for the next time you're having a conversation about domestic violence and some dingus pipes up with, I don't understand why they don't just leave. There's no excuse for not just leaving. We tried that. We tried that 7 times. We fled to women's shelters, we fled cities, we fled across the state. It's not always that simple. End serious sidebar. We lived in Tin Can Bay on Marlin Way and then on Groper Street, because all the streets in Tin Can Bay are named after fish. And then Dale decides it would be a good idea to move to Townsville, because why the fuck not? Except this time, I don't go with them. I stay in Tin Can Bay so I can go to a school for longer than 5 minutes. So Mum, Dale, Lauren and Tommy move to Townsville, and I move in with my grandparents. Now, as a 10-year-old, I assumed that my grandparents, that all grandparents, were optimal versions of parents. They are, after all, parents. What are grand? It's right there in the name. It wasn't until I was an adult and I was able to put the pieces together and figure out that maybe my grandparents weren't so grand. It was really small, almost abstract clues that gave it away, like discussing grandparents with friends, and one says, my nana always smelled of lavender and gave the best hugs. And one friend says, my granny always took us to the beach every school holidays, and every time she came to visit, she would give us $5. And then I add, when I was 4 years old, my grandmother didn't believe me when I said I didn't like cherries, so she force-fed me cherries. And then every time I shuddered from the taste, she beat me with her sandal. So I spent nearly 2 years living with these garbage people, as they attempted to make a man out of me, literally. All I did in my spare time was practice bowling a cricket ball by myself, paint stuff, and light fires for the barbecue. And one time I had to kill and gut my own chicken. So terrified were they that I might turn out exactly the way I've turned out. They also plunged me into a pop cultureless wasteland. The radio was only ever on ABC Local. The TV was mostly on ABC, or it was off altogether. They were physically repulsed by even the mention of The Simpsons, and we never went to the movies. There's pretty much a 2-year period between 91 and 93 where I have no idea what the world was like. I was permitted to watch 1 half-hour of television on a weeknight before the news, which I spent watching reruns of Bewitched. Yeah. Until my grandparents decided that maybe I liked a show about lady witches a little bit too much, and then they cut that off too. Question: if you are paranoid that your grandson might be gay, why would you cut him off from the one and only woman he's ever shown even the remotest bit of interest in? Mrs. Kravitz, obviously. So while I'm living in the fortress of pop culture solitude, my actual family had moved across from Townsville to Darwin. So in 1993, early in my first year of high school, I moved to Darwin. We live in a house in Hibiscus Street, and then in an apartment on Hart Court. So now picture this. Our apartment, shop, 6-lane main road. What am I going to do when I'm sent to the shop for, say, a 2-litre bottle of Diet Coke? Go all the way down to the pedestrian crossing like a chump? No. Just duck between the stopped cars when the lights are red. Thing is, on this occasion, the 3rd lane was not full. The cars were not stopped. They were still zipping past. So, I'm going to the shop. I duck between the stopped cars. I get to the 3rd lane. I just narrowly miss the 4-wheel drive as it hurtles past my face. But I don't miss the catamaran the 4-wheel drive is towing, and that is the 2nd time I got hit in the face with the box. Yeah. So I plough mouth first into this catamaran, leaving 3 of my teeth wedged in its hull. We never found them. I fall down, the boat runs over me, I regain consciousness underneath the boat. Later, in the ambulance, it is discovered that on top of my 3 still missing teeth, I have badly burned the backs of my legs because the bitumen in Darwin in October is unforgiving. I've also broken my jaw, some ribs, my knee, and I've fractured my neck. It is also discovered that I still have in my hand the $5 note that I was sent to the shop with. Extraordinarily obedient. So we left the apartment in Harcourt and moved back to Hibiscus Street, specifically the house next door to the house we used to live in Hibiscus Street, because that's smart. Yeah. But by now, I've become old enough to start fighting with Dale myself. Fearing for my safety, it is strongly suggested that I move back to Queensland to be with my grandparents. So in January 1994, I go, because I still don't realise that living with them is horrible. And I know it sounds crazy to not know that your grandparents are horrible people, but it really has only been as an adult that I've been able to figure it out. Like, think about the second time you watched The Sixth Sense. It's like that. Fun fact, like Bruce Willis's character in that film, my grandparents also make the room colder. So I don't realise that living with them is horrible. What I do immediately realise is horrible is the town they've moved to while I was away. Mergen. It's right there in the name. Mergen. Say it with me. 1, 2, 3. Mergen. Yeah. So, my grandmother. She is what I call a social polymorph. A polymorph being the shape-shifting monster from the 1980s British science fiction TV series Red Dwarf. I kept one of you, I lost everyone else. So my grandmother doesn't care about your feelings or opinions if she's related to you directly. But if you're a neighbour, or a teacher, or a complete stranger in line at the bank, all your opinions are her opinions. Which was exceptionally awkward in Mergen, because my grandparents' only friends were Don and Barb, a couple who were so deeply religious, it was against their faith to listen to the radio or watch television. So my grandmother hated the radio and the television, even though she watched it every night. Sure, it was mostly on ABC, but it was still fucking on. What this means is, whenever Don and Barb popped by unexpectedly one evening, one assumes on the way to or from church, or both, as my grandfather got up to answer the door, my grandmother would launch herself out of her recliner, fly over to the TV, punch it off, and then use that momentum to keep going all the way over to the dining table where a jigsaw puzzle had been laid out for just such an occasion, and she would pretend she had been here all night doing bits of Sky. This would have worked, except it was 1994. And 10-year-old TVs in 1994 don't turn off straight away. They leave a little white dot in the centre of the screen, and they spend 3 minutes going tick, 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 And this is a noise that we all had to pretend didn't exist. And I'm pretty sure on one occasion my grandmother tried to imply that the noise was coming from cicadas. Clearly that worked, because we stayed friends with Don and Barb. Such good friends, in fact, that we were able to move into Don and Barb's old house on acreage, 15 minutes outside of Proston, a town of about 300 people. The house had been built by Don and Barb when they were very young and didn't have a lot of money, so the house was all off casts. The bedroom doors were all front doors, so they all had big stained glass panels in the middle of them, and every doorknob in the house was a block of perspex that had been cut down to look like a crystal. And obviously there was no TV antenna, so I couldn't even watch Bewitched. Now, to get to school in Proston, I had to catch a bus, a raucous, rowdy bus. The bus was so raucous that on one occasion the bus driver threatened to quit in a rage. So to get to the bottom of the problem, the school held a survey of all the students who caught the bus and then had a parent-teacher evening to go through the survey responses. So I'm at home when my grandparents return from this parent-teacher evening, and my grandmother is giddy with excitement. She comes sweeping into the kitchen saying, "Oh, there's our good boy, it's your favourite for dinner tonight," which means tacos, so I'm very excited. But I have no idea what I've done. So I'm like, why am I a good boy? "Oh, Christopher, the survey, we're so proud of what you wrote." I thought the survey was anonymous. Oh yes, we know anonymous, but I saw one and I knew straight away it was yours. I said to the principal, "That one has to be Christopher's," and he agreed. Everyone else was so selfish. You were the only one with any consideration for the driver. And then she recited it because she'd had it committed to memory. She recited it as she laid taco shells out in the tray, using the taco shells as punctuation. "Everyone," taco, "is so rude to Mr. Bruce," taco, "who's just trying to do his job," taco, taco. "I think everyone," taco, "should leave him alone," taco, "and let him drive the bus," taco, taco. Little clap of approval, taco. And then I, extraordinarily obedient / an idiot, saying, "No, I didn't write that one." A taco hovers. Yeah. What do you mean you didn't write it? I mean, that's not the one I wrote. But that was the only good one. There were no good ones, there were just people's opinions. They asked us to write our opinions. Then what did you write? I wrote that the bus was too full and that's why everyone acted up. I wrote that they should either get a second bus or a bigger bus. Well, I have never been so humiliated in my life! And she threw the tray down with enough force to smash all the taco shells, stomped over to the lounge room, threw herself into a recliner, grabbed a crossword book and started stabbing at a puzzle with such ferocity you'd think she was mad at letters. She stayed here for an hour, pausing only to spit venom at me when she thought of new ways to say the exact same thing. "You made fools of us! We were singing your praises to Mr. Finnegan, but you were too busy being selfish! We put you on a pedestal for nothing!" Etc. I don't really have an ending for that story. Safe to say that my grandmother is a raging monstrous bitch. But eventually we left Proston and we moved to Crow's Nest, a town outside Toowoomba. Now you'd think from its lovely name that Crow's Nest is a nicer place than Melbourne, but you'd be wrong. So I left and moved back to Darwin to be with my actual family. Now they were moving house when I arrived, so I lived on Casuarina Drive for about 2 hours, and then I lived on Aurelia Street for 3 months, before we left again, because Dale had gotten a job in Moranbah. Because sure. Now Dale found us a place to live in Moranbah on Belyanto Avenue, but we couldn't stay there because that house was terrible. So we had to go into short-term emergency housing. Then, when the short-term emergency housing short-term had expired, there was nowhere else in Moranbah to rent, so we had to go back to the terrible house. Why was it terrible? I will tell you, no. The answer is, I don't know. We've worked Good answer. Why was it terrible? I will tell you. Belyanto Avenue had once been home to Moranbah's drive-in cinema. Now the drive-in had long closed down, but it hadn't been torn down, and we moved into the house intended for the cinema's caretaker. What I'm saying is, our backyard was literally an abandoned drive-in. The cinema screen was still intact, looming and ominous, and visible from every window. The speaker boxes all remained, thrusting out of the crumbling bitumen like metal fingers. We were living in a set piece from Silent Hill. Luckily, we made another attempt to run away from Dale, so we left Stephen King's summer home and moved to a place called Ravensbourne, which sounds like it's almost as creepy, and it was. So we left and moved into Crow's Nest, where my grandparents were. In 1995, in Crow's Nest on William Street, I ran away from home for the second time. Now, I'm proud to say I'm 14 by now, not 7, so I make it much further than the litter box. Yeah, I make it to Town Square, which is 2 whole blocks away. Also in 1995, my mother enrolls in a university in Rockhampton as a mature age student. So we moved to Rockhampton, and I'm enrolled in Rockhampton State High School. Now, at Rockhampton State High School, a weird thing happens. I did not make friends easily. In 22 schools, of which Rocky High was the 21st, I'd made friends at maybe 4 of them. But on my second day at Rocky High, a classmate called Margarita insisted I not sit by myself under a tree and instead go and join her friends and be friendly with them. I went, but I kept my guard up for 4 months because I knew this was some kind of long-form practical joke. But it wasn't. They were actually an excellent group of friends, some of whom I still have to this day. There's no punchline. These people probably saved my life. Oh, and also, I had my first kiss from Christelle. I also kissed my first boy, and my second boy, and my third boy, and this is in Rockhampton in the 90s as a pudgy teenager. I can't find that many men to kiss a date in Melbourne in 2015 as a fully grown pudgy adult. But there's 15-year-old me pashing on. Apparently, I've got game in Rockhampton. Well, it is Australia's beef capital. P.S. I didn't come out till I was 23. Even though I kissed 3 boys at 15 and did one other thing briefly, I was still in genuine turmoil for 8 more years. Because I'm stupid. Now, in Rockhampton, after 7 years of oppression and torment from Dale, physical, psychological, and emotional abuse, my mum reached a point where she kind of gave up hope. She had nothing left to give, and she had nothing left to lose. And if you've ever watched the season finale of Buffy, you'll know that that's often when you become spectacular. So, it's Saturday morning, and Dale is on yet another rampage, yelling at the kids, stomping around the house, harassing Mum, and just generally being a cunt. And Mum, realising that this is probably going to be the rest of her life, snaps. Dale is still mid-tantrum when Mum plants her foot, drops her shoulder, and punches him right in his fucking face. Yeah. Dale staggers back. He gets really mad. He pumps himself up like aggressive assholes do, also like what pigeons do when they get wet. And he says, "Don't you ever do that again." And Mum says, "What, this?" And she punches him again! So here's the thing about Dale. You know how they say that you should always stand up to bullies? Because deep down they're secretly cowards. And you're like, no, they're bullies, that's fucking stupid. Dale never touched her again. Ever. Dale was such a cliched, textbook, very special episode of Press Gang version of a bully. It's almost embarrassing. Nearly 10 years of domestic terrorism. 2 punches from a short, round, teetotaling cross-stitch enthusiast, and he was like, "Whoop, no, I'm done." I would almost feel bad for him. But then I remembered that he used to beat my mother, and he once made me sit on a shark. So no, he's still a cunt. Towards the end of 1996, my mum, totally free from Dale, transfers from a university in Rockhampton to a university in Toowoomba. So it's back to that whole area. I say goodbye to my excellent friends and snogging partners, and I finish my last year of high school there. Then, in 1998, halfway through my first year of university, which I did not finish, we moved to Brisbane. Now, I cannot begin to tell you what a joy it was to live in an actual place. It had shops that open on the weekend, and something resembling a public transport network, and when you watched the news at night, you knew they filmed the news in the place you were currently living. Now, that is an overlooked luxury. So we bounced around some places in Brisbane for a while. We lived in Weldon Street, and my name is Weldon, so that was fun, except when we tried to order a pizza. And then we moved to Ainsworth Street, but we couldn't stay there because the landlord kept letting himself in when we weren't home and doing funny little landlord things, like leaving a landlord butt-shaped imprint on Mum's bedspread, so we left there. And then, in 1999, I moved out of home. I moved into a share house, a proper, youthful Brisbane uni student. He died with a falafel in his hand share house. I was fucking terrified. I moved back home after 7 weeks. So we moved into a large house on Upper Lancaster Road in Ascot, which you need to know is fancy. My inner 6-year-old horse owner, very happy with Ascot. We lived in Ascot when Y2K happened, so then in 2000, I decided to try living by myself again. This time, by myself really. I'd just gotten my first full-time job in a toy store, and I was like, adulthood nailed. And so I moved into a tiny bedsit on the outskirts of the CBD. Now I had no furniture, none. I had a TV and a PS2, both of which lived on the floor. I slept on a cushion that was the back of a friend's wicker couch. The only item I had even remotely resembling an item of furniture was a large inflatable purple armchair, which, if you're very old or very young, I will fill you in. In the early 2000s, the very pinnacle of style was your own breath fashioned into household items. For just a couple of bucks and a Ventolin puffer, you could have whatever you wanted. Picture frames, vases, fake flowers, waste paper baskets, even things on which you could actually sit. And I had a large, inflatable purple armchair. And this is the point every other night this week where I've heard someone whisper, I had one of those. So I know I'm not alone. Now it turns out that working at the toy store was actually awful. It was, at that point, the worst job I'd ever had, and remains to this day the second worst job I have ever had. I was sad every day. This is probably because I was sleeping on a foam block in an apartment so small it was essentially a wardrobe with a stove in it, but I'm mostly blaming the job. So how could working at a toy store be horrible? Well, think about The Devil Wears Prada. But instead of a magazine editor, Meryl Streep is playing an angry, impotent retail manager with chronic short man syndrome, which she could totally do. Yeah. But I would wake up and I would feel sick about the day ahead. You know when you hate a job so much it makes you physically ill? That's what I had. The only comfort I got in my day was the 5 minutes in the morning before I had to go to work, which I would spend sitting on my tiny balcony in my armchair with a cup of instant Moccona. So this one morning, I'm sitting out there feeling that same sick feeling here, but on this occasion it feels more intense than it normally does. There's this pulling, sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, like I'm involuntarily folding in half. And then I feel my spine go cold, and I feel it pressing against my chest, and I realize I'm having a heart attack at the age of 20. It is like the last 15 years of bad thing after bad thing after bad thing had finally caught up with me, and my body was just giving out. Except it turns out my chair was just deflating. My spine was cold because my bum was on the concrete. And the pressing against my chest was my own knees. I'd broken my chair and I'd spilled my coffee. For so many years, my life had been entirely controlled by Dale, and then by my grandmother, and now by angry, impotent Meryl Streep. I quit my job that day, left my apartment and moved back home. Now while I was away, my mum had joined a 10-pin bowling league, as you do, and there she met the man who would become her third husband, Mike. Spoiler, also her third divorce. So we moved in with Mike, and then we moved with Mike to a larger house on Chalfont Street, and we lived on Chalfont Street for over 1 year. That's a big deal. Yeah. Also, on Chalfont Street, I came out 8 years after kissing my first boy and 2 other boys and doing one other thing briefly. I was finally comfortable with who I was. But P.S., I didn't actually date anyone for another 6 years after that. I should have just moved back to Rockhampton. In 2003, Mum and Mike decided to move somewhere closer to Mike's work, a suburb called Slacks Creek. I, a recent homosexual and full-time fancy boy, wouldn't be caught dead in a place that sounds like a euphemism for shitting your pants. So I moved out for the third and final time. I started out house sitting for some friends in a mansion on Ironwood Street, which was amazing, if stressful, because I spent all my time trying to hide my clothes from the housekeeper because I felt bad about her cleaning them. You'd think someone who used to own horses would have taken to the housekeeper with more finesse, but no. So I left the house sitting house and moved into a share house on Simpsons Road. And this house had so many spiders. So many spiders. One was so big, when it ran up a lava lamp, its feet touched around the other side. You haven't lived until you've seen a spider doing an impression of a koala up a lava lamp. The only thing worse than the spiders was the constant kicking, stomping, scrabbling from the possums that lived both under the floor and in the ceiling, and the only thing that stopped the possums was the giant carpet python that moved into the ceiling and ate all the possums. But then we were sharing a house with a giant carpet python and 978 spiders. So I moved out of the terrarium. I moved in with my friend Pete. Now Pete was tall and handsome and very popular with the ladies, also me. And I worked with Pete at B105, a radio station in Brisbane. I'd started out as a volunteer and I'd worked my way up through various jobs until eventually I had my very own late night radio comedy show. And I was living with handsome Pete in an apartment back on Upper Lancaster Road in Ascot, which you'll remember is fancy. Everything was going so well, something had to go wrong, and it did. We had to move because they sold the apartment. So in 2004, I'm 23 years old, and I decided to try living on my own again. I moved into an apartment in a building called the Tuscan Quarter, which, fun fact, the only Tuscan thing about the Tuscan Quarter is the word Tuscan written on the side of the building. Despite this, I love it. I would have lived in the Tuscan Quarter forever, except my late night radio comedy show had become a Saturday morning radio comedy show, which had become a fill-in for the regular breakfast show radio comedy show until eventually we were sold, like fancy concubines on a pirate ship, to a radio station in Canberra to be a proper, full-time breakfast radio show. So on New Year's Eve 2004, I moved to Canberra to be a celebrity. This is a real thing that happened. I started out in Canberra in an apartment with a revolving door of idiots, till eventually I moved in with 3 of the best people I have ever met into a giant house that was so fancy. The front yard had a fountain in it. There was a statue of a little boy peeing. My inner 6-year-old horse owner had never been more satisfied. So we lived there for about a year until the owners of that place sold it. But we moved into an equally large house around the corner, and I lived in this house for 3 years and 5 months, which is to this day the longest time I've ever spent in one house ever. Well, it was 3 years and 5 months if you don't count that bit in 2008 when I moved to Sydney for 2 weeks. See, my radio show ended in 2007, but in 2008, I got a job as the website content editor of an Australian weekly gossip magazine in Sydney. However, the magazine eclipsed the toy store and became the worst job I have ever had. I cried every day for 6 days. I quit on my 7th day, and on my 10th day, I moved back to Canberra. It is for this reason that I cannot tell you who I worked for. Who I worked for. In 2010, after living in Canberra for 5 years, 3 years and 5 months minus 2 weeks of which was spent in the one house, I moved to Melbourne. Now, I loved living in Canberra, but I had long coveted Melbourne. Coveted in exactly the same way the Bible says you're not supposed to do donkeys. I think. Now, my starter home in Melbourne wasn't great. I was only there for 5 months. But if you've been listening so far, 5 months is actually pretty good. Then I moved into an apartment in Brunswick, and it is there that I had the idea for a blog. I was going to write a story for every address I've had, and I was going to post one story every week. But before I started this blog, I was determined to write out all the stories first, because I have a habit of not finishing what I start, which is why I can read some Spanish but not speak any of it, and why the blanket I'm currently crocheting is shaped like an L. So, Writing the story started easily enough. I mean, the stories I've got to tell, that shark shit pretty much writes itself. But how do you end something like that? How do you know what the point of a story is if you don't know what the ending is? Fortunately, in 2012, I caught a break. My boyfriend and I, I'm as surprised as you. My boyfriend and I decided to move in together. And I had my ending. It was me living in a cute little cottage in Carlton with a bay window and a courtyard and my live-in partner. The address in Carlton is actually only address number 58. Yeah, I got dumped. Why?
I don't know.
That's so sweet of you to say. I can't think of a single reason either. So in 2013, I moved into an apartment in Thornbury to escape, to regroup, to work out a new ending for the blog. It's actually wonderful. 10 years after living in the Tuscan Quarter, I'm by myself again, and I love it. Also, while living there, I'm able to jettison one of the final, shittier bits of my childhood, my grandparents. Here's a hot tip, just a helpful thing for you. If you're looking for an excuse to cut someone out of your life, might I suggest having an argument over something ridiculously trivial, like, hypothetically off the top of my head, the placement of a mattress for a grandson to sleep on at Christmas. Yeah, that way when you've got someone up in your face screaming with crazy eyes, you can more accurately assess whether you ever want that kind of crazy in your life ever again. So there's one more place, the place I'm living in right now. I sublet a room above a film studio from my former boss, Cassie. I share the residence with Cassie, her ex-boyfriend Paul, her new husband, also called Paul, and a large dog, also called Paul. I'm kidding. The dog is not called Paul, the first two are called Paul. I've painted my room red. Paul's room is essentially a large video game projection centre with a bed squished in one corner. Cassie and her husband, Paul, live in what used to be the walk-in pantry, and the dog sleeps anywhere except wherever the dog's bed is. Living here is actually delightful. It is unconventional, but it is delightful. Now, it is clear from description alone, all the fucking Pauls, that this is not the place I'm going to live forever. I have no intention of going anywhere right now. In fact, I feel quite settled. But facts are facts. I will move again one day. But by now, I have come to terms with that. So where does that leave everyone else? My family. My mum is okay. 6 months ago, she moved to Melbourne and now lives 10 minutes down the road from me. Yeah. My sister is okay. She and her husband live in a very nice apartment in Ascot. And my brother is okay, but he's chosen to live in Toowoomba, which really undermines the poetry of this happy ending I was going. So even though I was once forced to sit on a shark, I didn't date till I was nearly 30, and I still can't enjoy rewatching Porky's 2, I'm okay. I haven't let any of that stop me from becoming someone that I can be proud of. It has shaped me, but it doesn't define me. If anything, cataloguing this stuff for the blog and this show has made me realise I have seen and done some shit. Life is scary, really scary. But if you index all the things you've been through, you'll realise there's not much point being too scared because life will always be crazier than anything you could possibly predict. I once sat on a shark. I was hit in the face with a boat twice. I was a celebrity in Canberra for 2 years, and I once fake owned real horses. So, if you do catalogue all the things that have happened to you, you'll have a list of all the things that you've survived. And if you could take even one moment to be proud of that, you can take that list of all the things you've seen, all the things you've done, all the things that you are, and you can just move it down one line. And above it, you can put, the first thing you need to know is I'm okay.